Civil Procedure Basics Video 1, Personal Jurisdiction. This is a brief introduction to judicial authority. Welcome to civil procedure. Civil procedure is the system of rules that directs the court's adjudicatory disputes. The goal of civil procedure is not to decide who wins or who loses, but to ensure that the judicial process yields a valid judgment. What is a valid judgment? A valid judgment is a judgment that is enforceable and that is consistent with the rule of law. A judgment that cannot be enforced is meaningless. It's not worth the paper that it's written on. A judgment that is inconsistent with the rule of law is a direct assault on justice itself. So when you go through the judicial process and at the end you have an order, civil procedure is the system of rules that ensures that the order is enforceable and that ensures that the order is consistent with the rule of law. Now, civil procedure is not just a mere collection of boxes to check. Civil procedure is the foundation of judicial authority, the framework that determines whether a court's words carry with them the binding force of the rule of law, or whether those words collapse into mere irrelevance. Civil procedure is vast. It's an entire system, right? An entire system. And because it's so enormous, we cannot cover every aspect in one semester. So our task this semester is to focus on 6 essential pillars. Those 6 essential pillars are: 1, judicial authority; 2, case shaping through pleadings and joinder; 3, the pretrial process; 4, motion practice; 5, trial and beyond; and finally, 6, special doctrines as time permits, that include but are not limited to the Erie Doctrine, abstention doctrines, and preclusions. So this is what we plan to cover this semester. It's a lot of territory, but these are the basic procedural processes in civil courts. Now, take a look right here. 6 modules. First module, judicial authority. Let's talk about judicial authority. Exactly what is judicial authority? Well, judicial authority is the lawful power of a court to render a valid judgment. So judicial authority is the lawful power of a court to render a valid judgment. A valid judgment, we've already explained, right, is a judgment that's enforceable, that is binding, that is consistent with the rule of law. A valid judgment has 3 components, right? Valid judgment has 3 components. 1, personal jurisdiction, which is the power over the parties. 2, subject matter jurisdiction, which is the power over the types of cases. And 3, notice with proper service. And that is the procedural guarantee of due process. Now, These do not answer who wins, but together they do determine which court has the lawful power to decide who wins. So that ultimate nugget, that ultimate tangible outcome of judicial authority, right? The whole point of the system of civil procedure is to yield a judgment that is valid. In order for that judgment to be valid, these three components have to be met. The court who's issuing the judgment must have personal jurisdiction, that's power or authority over the parties. The court that is issuing the judgment must have subject matter jurisdiction, that's power over the type of case. And there must be proper notice to the parties who need to be noticed, and that notice must be given with a method that is considered proper service. If one of the three of those pieces are missing, you do not have a valid judgment. So, in other words, in order to have a valid judgment, you have this conjunctive rule. You have to have personal jurisdiction, you have to have subject matter jurisdiction, and you have to have notice with proper service. Keep this in mind, right? This is the 30,000 foot view. This is if we were in an airplane and we were climbing to cruising altitudes of a commercial jetliner and we looked down, right? This is the big picture. We would see a valid judgment below us. And of that valid judgment, a portion is personal jurisdiction, a portion is subject matter jurisdiction, a portion is notice with proper service. All of that together, it's a valid judgment. Okay. Now we're going to descend and we're going to start to look at personal jurisdiction, subject matter jurisdiction, and then notice and service. And actually, for my class, we're going to look at personal jurisdiction, notice and service, and then subject matter jurisdiction. Okay. All three of those have to be addressed. Your individual professors may choose for their own valid reasons to address them differently. But again, for Professor Washington's class, this is fall of 2025, we're going to go with personal jurisdiction, notice and service, and then subject matter jurisdiction. Great. Since personal jurisdiction is going to be the first component that we're going to look at, we need to look at the phases of personal jurisdiction. There's an authority phase, and then there is a process phase. First, the authority phase. Here's the question that is being asked in the authority phase. Does the court have lawful power over the defendant? Does the court have lawful power over the defendant? Remember, we're talking about personal jurisdiction, right? This requires statutory authority and constitutional authority. So, personal jurisdiction, notice and service, subject matter jurisdiction, three components of judicial authority. Personal jurisdiction, as the first component that we're going to discuss, has two phases. It has an authority phase, which is asking, does the court have authority, power over the defendant? And then we have a process phase. Under the authority phase, there's two components that must be addressed: statutory authority and constitutional authority. When we start into the cases to look at the evolutionary arc of personal jurisdiction, That authority phase initially was determined based upon geographic boundaries. It evolves into minimum contacts. The minimum contacts are going to be refined as purposeful availment, and we're going to continue on the evolutionary arc. Yeah? Now, second, right, because these are the two phases of personal jurisdiction. The second phase, remember, the authority phase has two parts. This process phase, right, is asking, has the defendant been properly brought before the court? So, what is the authority phase asking? The authority phase is asking, does the court have lawful power over the defendant? And the process phase is asking, has the defendant been properly brought before the court? To answer the question about whether or not the defendant has been properly brought before the court, that is going to require an inquiry into the notice that was given to the defendant and the methodology of the service of that notice. Okay, so big picture, I have a judgment and I'm trying to decide if this judgment is valid, right? Personal jurisdiction, subject matter jurisdiction, notice, and process. If I am looking at personal jurisdiction, I have an authority phase, which answers whether or not the court has the lawful power over the defendant. And then I have the process phase, which asks, has the defendant been properly brought before the court? In order to address the authority question, I have to have statutory authority and constitutional authority. And in order to address the process phase, I have to have notice and I have to have a method of service of the notice. Excellent. Keep moving. The two phases of personal jurisdiction, what two phases? These two phases, the authority phase and the process phase. The two phases construct authority and procedure. Those are my pillars. Authority of the court and the procedure, right? So over the next several classes, which are going to be the next several videos, we're going to study Pennoyer v. Neff, International Shoe, Hansen v. Dekla, Worldwide Volkswagen, Burger King, and on and on. We're going to use this two-phase construct as the framework, the authority phase and the process phase, to understand how courts determine the reach of their power, right? How far does the court's power, how far does the court's authority go? Now, last slide, brief recap. The purpose of this very short video was to acclimate you to where we are in the process of trying to obtain a valid judgment. Everything that we talk about thereafter, right? The 6 modules that we're going to address thereafter are all working toward one goal, which is a valid judgment. I've said again, quick recap. I apologize in advance for the whiplash. A valid judgment has 3 parts: personal jurisdiction, subject matter jurisdiction, notice with proper service. If you're in my class, we're addressing the first component as personal jurisdiction. Personal jurisdiction has 2 phases. It has an authority phase, it has a process phase. In the authority phase, this is just where I'm trying to find out If the court has legal authority, has lawful power, right, to pull that defendant in court and to issue an order that is going to bind that defendant, which means it's going to issue a valid judgment that can be enforced if that defendant doesn't comply. Personal jurisdiction, two phases. Authority, I need statutory authority and constitutional authority. And the process phase, I need notice and service. Okay? Get it? Recap. The point of judicial authority, the point of the civil procedure system is to yield a valid judgment. That's the point. A judgment is only valid if the court possesses lawful power. The power rests in the three components of the valid judgment: personal jurisdiction, subject matter jurisdiction, notice, and service. Each of these components is distinct, but all are indispensable. Remove any one of the three, and the judgment collapses. The judgment is not voidable, but the judgment is void. Okay? With that framework in place, we're going to turn to our next video, which is going to be the formal introduction of personal jurisdiction. Yeah? Excellent. Looking forward to it. Hope this very short 30,000 foot view gives you an overall perspective so that as we move through the modules, you recognize what piece plays what role and where that piece goes. Goal being a valid judgment. Excellent. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you on the next video.